Hi there, my name is Craig Stevenson, the President and CEO of Centennial College, and I'm speaking with you during the second full week of the fall semester. And what a beautiful, tranquil fall morning it is. And this morning I wanted to take a moment to highlight an important day on the Centennial calendar, September 30th, Orange Shirt Day. This is a day when we honour Indigenous children who were sent away to Canadian residential schools, and it's a day when we take some time to learn more about the history of those schools. Indian residential schools were operated from the 1800s until as late as 1996, less than a quarter of a decade ago. They were begun by religious orders including Roman Catholic, Anglican, Presbyterian, United and Methodist churches, and they were financed by the federal government. The first Prime Minister of Canada, John A. Macdonald, encouraged their development, originally recommended by Egerton Ryerson in 1847 to the Superintendent General of Indian Affairs. That was the government department that centralised domestic education and religious instruction as the basis for Indigenous education. Attendance to these schools for status Indians under the age of 15 was made mandatory in 1920. These schools, in addition to Indian day and industrial schools, removed over 150,000 First Nations, Métis and Inuit children from their families, their homes and their communities, and forced them to speak English or French, and intentionally disconnect them from their cultural practices, which were made illegal by the Indian Act of 1880. These schools were often underfunded, requiring students to work half the day, and what instruction was offered was designed to assimilate, compromising their access to education, a right under many treaties. Students were subjected to verbal, physical and sexual abuse, which has had a lasting impact of intergenerational trauma within families and communities. It's believed that at least 50% of all students who attended these schools never made it home, and many were buried in unmarked graves with their families never knowing what had happened to them. The Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement resulted in the establishing of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2017, and an apology by the Government of Canada to the survivors of residential schools and their families the following year. In June 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission presented the executive summary of the findings contained in its multi-volume final report, including 94 calls to action. 94 calls to action to further reconciliation between Canadians and Indigenous peoples. A number of those calls to action speak directly to education, which has a key role to play in honouring our obligations for truth and reconciliation. Hence the co-creation with Indigenous nations and communities of Centennial's own Indigenous strategic framework, with its 5 pillars, its 13 commitments and 44 calls to action, to ensure, and I quote, that Indigenous knowledge, voices, critiques, scholars, learners and materials become an essential element of the college. Orange Shirt Day prompts our resolve and determination to continue that journey, respecting the wisdom of elders, traditionalists and members of Indigenous nations and communities with whom we commit to work, providing equitable access and supports to Indigenous students and employees, and engaging the whole Centennial community in Indigenous teachings and learnings. Indeed, Orange Shirt Day represents one such learning opportunity where with open hearts and minds, not only can we learn about the history and legacy of residential schools, but also as a result, think, act and respond differently. That is the power of learning. Thank you for your time today.
Danse. I'm Sean Kinsella, Director of the 8th Fire. Migazi Dodem, Wazakone Mashkiki Natishnakas, Nidia Atnia Atim Samoak, Nishnabek Indao, Takaranto Natonji Gay Natonjiba. We're here today commemorating Orange Shirt Day, which began in Williams Lake in 2013 and has since spread to other schools in BC and across Canada. This date was selected because September was the time of year when students were taken from their communities to attend the schools. The orange shirt references the shirt that survivor Phyllis Webstat was given by her grandmother for her first day of school at the St. Joseph's Mission Residential School. When students arrived at these schools, they were often stripped of their personal items, markers of their culture, family, and communities, never to see them again. To Phyllis, the color orange has always reminded her of her experiences at residential school, and as she has said, how my feelings didn't matter, how no one cared, and I felt like I was worth nothing. All of us little children were crying, and no one cared. The orange shirts and regalia, such as this pin that I have on my shirt here, we wear on September 30th, is a reminder that every child matters, that every student who never made it home and those who lived through their experiences, their stories, and the legacy of resilience that they have brought to our communities matters. That the courage of those who have shared their testimonies and stories as part of the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and process matters. That those who were never able to tell their stories still matter. Craig mentioned in his video the Indigenous Strategic Framework, which Centennial created following many gatherings starting in 2010 with Indigenous knowledge keepers, traditionalist grandparents, and community members. We owe an immense gratitude to those such as Riva Jewell, Oneida Clan Mother Advocate, social innovator, and service provider of the Haudenosaunee, as well as those others who gathered to build the legacy and strategies in our Indigenous Strategic Framework that link directly to the calls for action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report. We honor the work as well of those who have come before us, including the labor of those commissioners and communities involved in the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, which was instrumental in bringing the experiences of residential school survivors to the forefront. We recognize the continued work necessary to rebuild the nation-to-nation relationship that was promised under original treaties, and the role that every single one of us at Centennial has in the work of decolonization of the institution. This is work that begins by grappling with the legacy of inequality and genocide faced by us as Indigenous peoples in this country, Turtle Island, and beyond. Wearing these shirts is a reminder of how far we have come in being able to speak our truths, but also how much more work ahead to really begin the idea of reconciliation. Ekozi, Miigwech, thank you for joining us for this day.